If you clicked on this video because you were confused, interested, upset, or feeling a different sort of emotion, please allow me to explain myself. When we think about Star Wars, we first think about the movies and maybe the TV shows. Before the Disney acquisition, that mainly covered the prequel and original trilogy, as well as the 3D animated The Clone Wars show. Since the acquisition, we've gotten a sequel trilogy, new animated shows, and the introduction of Disney Plus and live action Star Wars shows, most notably The Mandalorian. It's September 2022, and it has been 3 years since we've had a Star Wars film of any kind. And all the new Star Wars live action releases have shifted away from the theater to the comfort of our own homes. While these live action shows have been incredible and an entirely new entryway into the saga for many fans, these shows have thus far served more as a tool for fleshing out the gaps between the mainline movies and the eras they're set around. Other streaming services do the same for their big IPs that often originated as films, but streaming services have the potential to further intertwine themselves with these movies directly. In the early 2000s, when the Lord of the Rings trilogy was being released in theaters, much of the content adapted from the novels had to be left on the cutting floor. As a way to appeal to the fans who wanted as full of an adaptation as possible, the extended editions of the film were released. I myself have yet to watch the theatrical versions of the films, as I always have wanted the grandness of the story in its fullest. But as much as I enjoyed the extended editions, I can admit that the scenes added in often can drag the pacings of the films. But from here, an interesting development has occurred. Netflix brought Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight to their service as a special extended edition in April 2019. But to the surprise of many fans, the film was edited into a miniseries with 4 episodes. While there was new scenes added into each episode, the film was now able to be digested in an entirely new way, with intentional starts and stops. Tarantino also wants to bring his most recent film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, to streaming services in the same way, and I find this concept to be really awesome. The possibility of allowing Star Wars filmmakers to provide extended editions of their theatrical films on Disney Plus as an extended miniseries would be a very appealing use of these digital platforms. It would allow filmmakers to cut and paste films as intended for the theater experience, but then add in new scenes into their converted films that are much more digestible in a TV series format for fans at home. While it's probably not possible to do this with the films made prior to the Disney acquisition, I thought I would start this series to highlight how I would personally make each Star Wars film in the Skywalker saga into a TV series. So, let's begin with episode 1, The Phantom Menace. For the purposes of this video, I rewatched The Phantom Menace and read materials set just before and during the events of the film to help with creating this hypothetical extended miniseries. What was important for me was finding out just how much time passes in-universe during the course of the film. While I won't explain my methodology, I concluded that based on the events of the movie and the canon novel, Queen's Peril, the Trade Federation blockade of Naboo and all that follows takes place over 11.7 days, or nearly 12 days. While it's not absolutely necessary for this hypothetical, it did convince me that the 6-episode event series format used for Obi-Wan Kenobi would work quite well here. Assuming each episode is around 40 minutes, the runtime of the TV extended series would be around 240 minutes, which is an additional 109 minutes over the 131-minute runtime of the film. While that seems like too much to add into the film, the first 40 minutes of added footage would serve as the basis of the first episode, and it would be derived almost entirely from Queen's Peril. Further following the Obi-Wan Kenobi event series, the titles of each episode will simply be labeled in parts. So without further ado, here's how it'll play out. In this hypothetical miniseries version of the film, the story would begin on Naboo and would focus on Padme, her handmaidens, and the general planet. I always felt that anything connected to Naboo held a layer of mystery around it, but I feel that comes because the coolest parts weren't ever fully developed. This episode would start in the midst of young 14-year-old Padme Amidala's early days as the queen, as she comes to cherish and work in unison with her 5 handmaidens, Rabe, Irte, Yane, Sache, and Sabe. For the purposes of the film version, the handmaidens do not matter much outside of Sabe, but a miniseries could really develop them and explain why they function, which is a large focus of Queen's Peril. It would also allow us to see Padme be looser and freer with girls her age, and showcase the stiffness of their ceremonial and political duties as more of an overt act of performance. Padme would then inform Senator Palpatine of her plans to host a summit for the other worlds in the Chamal sector as a way of rebuilding ties to Naboo's neighbors, which would then allow us to switch over and see Palpatine be forced to put his plans for Naboo earlier than anticipated. We'd still see how the summit goes, and the evening mishaps of Padme and the handmaidens as they sneak out to a concert, and the ensuing confusion caused by Padme and Sabe switching places, and Padme interacting with a girl Sabe has been flirting with during the summit. This would allow us to see Sabe become a realized character early on, as she is always switching with Padme to stand in as the queen during the film. We would then spend some time with Palpatine as he returns to the Senate to vote against the new taxation bills pushed by the Trade Federation representatives against Naboo, and confers with other senators of Chancellor Valorum's ineffectiveness and possible corruption. This would fit in with the legend's depictions of the character as a political mastermind, while also allowing new fans to see him as a good guy caring for his planet in his own way. Little do they know. We would then switch over to Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Jedi Temple archives, as the two pore over the new taxation bills because of Qui-Gon's misgivings about them. The scene would allow us to see Qui-Gon trusting in the living and cosmic force to guide him, and would allow Obi-Wan to question his master just like in the book. Obi-Wan would be a more active player in this miniseries, butting heads with his master from the start for going behind the Jedi Council's back and seeing it all as a waste of time, before Qui-Gon would lightly remind his Padawan that it's all a matter of perspective and preparation, while also letting him know that he was unlikely to kickstart a romance with the local nobility as Obi-Wan had recently done. The scene would not only set up these characters, but it would also allow Star Wars to do what it does best: reference something so enticing before the story has even been laid out for it. We would then return to Naboo with the summit ending, when suddenly the Trade Federation's Newt Gunray, via hologram, would demand Padme to sign a trade treaty, which she would refuse. Immediately, the blockade would then jump into place around the planet. Padme and her royal court and handmaidens would then jump into action to see how long the planet could defend itself and how much food it had, and would discover they have only 1 week for the whole planet. This would prompt her to reach out to Palpatine and the Senate to send ambassadors for help. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan would then be called into the Jedi Council, who would send the surprisingly well-prepared Jedi on their way, ending the first part. From here on out, the rest of the film will play out mostly the same in the extended series, aside from additions from Queen's Peril and my own ideas. The second episode would focus on the Jedi's arrival to the blockade and up to the Queen's escape from Naboo and her royal starship. We'd see Palpatine primarily in this episode as the hooded evil figure behind the Trade Federation's actions throughout this episode, and the ensuing introduction of Darth Maul, allowing newer fans to remain convinced that Palpatine is a good guy unable to be in contact with his planet, and that this is someone else. With this episode covering up to the 20th minute of the film's runtime, the additional 12 minutes could be filled in with more time spent introducing the Gungan city of Otoh Gunga and focusing a bit on handmaiden Sache and Yane staying behind with Governor Bibble on the planet with no more space on the royal starship, and the events that begin to occur in Camp 4. They would then begin their plan of using the handmaiden underrobes in strips to use traditional communication code taught to Naboo children to resist the Trade Federation occupation. Part 3 would focus on the events between the 28th and 52nd minute mark of the theatrical film, from the arrival at Tatooine up to Maul's arrival and his further dispatch of the probe droids. As I introduced the handmaiden Sabe and Padme interacting heavily in Part 1, the surprise would be lost regarding who is who when dressed as the Queen, but I believe that surprise only hits for the youngest of viewers. Regardless, in the additional 16 minutes of runtime, we would see Padme interact with Sabe and Panaka, who himself recreated the handmaiden system, and have her win out in a debate between the three of them to be allowed to accompany Qui-Gon onto the planet despite the risks. We would then have a few more establishing shots of Mos Espa and spend more time focusing on Anakin and Padme's initial friendship. It would allow Anakin to showcase his kind-heartedness even more as he takes them through the city to his home, while also allowing him to develop his crush on Padme. He could further interact with Jira a little longer, the old lady who gives him some fruit as the others walk away, where she then notices him staring at Padme and then gives him the Japor snippet to begin carving into a necklace for her. I also think the passage back to Anakin's home could allow him to inadvertently showcase his Force sensitivity, maybe navigating the blinded group through a sandstorm before reaching the clearing in front of his house, which Qui-Gon would of course notice and later connect to Anakin's talked up pod racing skills. The fourth part covers the 52nd minute to the 1 hour and 18th minute mark of the film, from just before the pod race and all the way up to the escape from Tatooine after Qui-Gon first duels Darth Maul. The extra 14 minutes would further highlight Padme's deep gratitude for Anakin's risk-taking, Anakin's further preparations of the necklace, and the goodbye between Anakin and Shmi. This part would also spend some time in the Camp 4 prison camp back on Naboo, where Sache is grabbed by the droids and is threatened in front of Governor Bibble, where she slips in some code for him to tell the Queen and raises the spirits of the fellow prisoners. I would also use this time to have Obi-Wan discuss the pod race and Qui-Gon with Panaka, to showcase the differences between the Master and the Apprentice, and both men's worry for the Queen. I would love for Obi-Wan to subtly hint that he and Qui-Gon know about the Handmaiden subterfuge, allowing him to show a hint of the future political savvy that he has, and for Panaka to neither confirm nor deny. It would also be great to have the deleted scene of Anakin fighting the Rodian who thinks he cheated in the pod race, but without it being Greedo. It would showcase just a tinge of the anger and insecurity that Anakin feels, especially upon leaving his mother. The hour 19 mark up to the hour 37 mark is the basis for the fifth part of the TV extended series, and the one where most of the setup for the climactic final part can be fleshed out. The events covered here begin with the arrival to Coruscant, and end with the Queen and the Jedi returning to Naboo. I believe a further focus between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon before and after the Jedi Council hearings would be most important, as the two spend the entirety of being on Tatooine in very limited contact. Whatever contact they have directly between each other is based on need, and not simply for what the other thinks of each other and what they're doing. I would further heighten Obi-Wan's qualms about everything that occurred on Tatooine post-duel, and have Qui-Gon continue to vouch for Anakin and explain to Obi-Wan that he needs to listen to the Force more than the Council. Obi-Wan would then find Anakin after he falls asleep under the blanket Padme gives him, and see Qui-Gon then come and sit next to the boy and hold him with fatherly care, which then prompts Obi-Wan to slide into deep thought as he ponders the boy's future and how it'll affect his own. After Anakin is tested, Qui-Gon would then vouch for Obi-Wan to take the Jedi trials and become knighted, and Obi-Wan would then recognize that his master's actions played out the way they did because of his total trust in him, with Qui-Gon believing that there's nothing more that he could teach his Padawan. Anakin would also be able to interact with both Sabe and Padme as they switch between their different attires, with the two girls sharing the sweetness of the boy with each other before the Senate session. We would also return to Naboo again, where we would see Sache be captured and tortured for information, furthering the plight of the Naboo people and highlighting the developing relationship between her and Yane, as well as a quick moment of Darth Maul eagerly awaiting his duel with the two Jedi, after Palpatine gives him the command to kill them both, salivating and eager like his Clone Wars version often is before a fight. Most of the final part of this miniseries, which would cover the return to Naboo and the final celebration, remains mostly the same as the finale in the film. I don't dislike having 4 battles occur concurrently like some people do, but the extra 7 minutes to be added to the runtime could allow for a greater focus to be placed on the infiltration of the Royal Palace, for the development of the new alliance between the Naboo people and the Gungans, extra time spent between Anakin and Padme post-reveal, and Anakin and Obi-Wan as the apprenticeship and the sad first moments are shared together, without Qui-Gon looking over both of them. I think a few minutes added here and there regarding these scenes would greatly help the pacing of the final climactic finale. And with that, the extended miniseries version of The Phantom Menace comes to a close. Thank you guys so much for watching this weekly special. I plan on making it into a video series for you guys to follow and continue again with Attack the Clones. So do let me know if you enjoyed it, or if you have your own thoughts about what could be added into the film if it were to be possibly made into a hypothetical extended miniseries on Disney+. If you haven't already, make sure to like and comment on this video and subscribe to our channel. We drop new videos at least twice a week, as well as daily discussion posts on our community tab, as well as on our Instagram stories. If you're an audio podcast fan, you can find us on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and almost any podcast platform out there. If you haven't already, follow us on our social media. You can find us on TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.